Welcome to the $1 Million Nonprofit Podcast. I'm Tom Kelly, your nonprofit catalyst. As the founder of Charity Auctions Today and Donor Books, I've spent almost 2 decades helping organizations like yours break through fundraising barriers, engage communities on a deeper level, and accelerate meaningful growth. In this podcast, along with my incredible guests, we'll uncover transformational ideas, tackle challenges head-on, and share insider strategies that you won't find anywhere else. Each episode is designed to take your nonprofit to the $1 million mark and beyond, because impact doesn't scale by chance, it scales by choice. So let's get started. Josh, welcome to the $1 Million Nonprofit Podcast today.
Hey, Tom, how you doing?
Doing great, my man. And so I know we're talking about trends in the nonprofit world, and I kind of look at trends and how can nonprofits use them, and a lot of nonprofits are just starting out, or they have small teams and they really just don't even know how to look at data or even figure out, do I need to even be looking at data, or how do I look at data to help my nonprofit grow? And I know you're the expert in the data for nonprofit trends and how they can implement this and help grow their organizations, whether it be their donor base, their volunteers, the amount of money that they make. And I want to just kind of start with, why is it important for a nonprofit to stay up to date on giving trends?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And in some ways, when you're working in a nonprofit, you're carrying such a heavy load, it can feel sometimes like you're alone. And I think, first of all, it's helpful to know you're not alone. Certainly fundraising is not a new thing. It's been around for, since ancient times. But right now, there's millions of nonprofits, really, and there's people doing great things. A lot of things have been tried, things that have worked, some things that haven't worked. So I think at its core, first, just comparing, am I doing okay? Maybe it's for ideation. What are other people doing that's worked for them that maybe that would work for me? I know every situation is special. We're all very special. We have our uniqueness, but there's also a lot of things that are not so unique that we can learn from. So what's working, what's not? Am I okay? And really within sector, nonprofits in general, because what's not new is generosity. Your mission might be new, or maybe the problems are changing and evolving in this changing world. But the ways to encourage people to step up and solve those problems is a very human thing and not a new thing.
And, when you're looking at trends, you mentioned it like, hey, how are we doing compared to maybe someone else that does the same type of mission work, or we support the same type of communities and mission? How can they, I guess, find the data of what other nonprofits that are similar to them are doing, and how can they utilize what they learn to help themselves grow, or maybe learn from maybe a mistake that someone else did so that they don't make it themselves?
Yeah, so first of all, my biggest background is with Giving USA, which has been a report. It's really been the almanac of fundraising since the 1950s. And it's really built by this industry, people from different sectors contributing information. The written text has stories. Each year it's I guess an almanac, for lack of a better word. What's happening? Where's this going? But certainly this is a really giving community. If you're in a for-profit in companies, they're very competitive, and sure, there's trades associations where you go and maybe get bad chicken and little baubles with corporate logos on them. But there's always this little undercurrent of competition. There's not that same undercurrent of competition in nonprofits. People that choose to make the world a better place are very sharing about helping others make the world a better place. So within your communities, in the AFP, CASE, AHP, all these different associations, you can just look up fundraising associations and find them. Go out and meet people, or just site visit and visit. People are very sharing. But I think Giving USA is a wonderful starting point.
Do you ever find, when you're talking with different nonprofits, are any of them kind of weary about sharing their data with maybe a almost competing nonprofit? Or is everybody pretty much open to be like, hey, here's my data. I want to publish it for the world so that other people, organizations in other states or other parts of the world can kind of view what we're doing right or wrong and use it to basically grow their mission? Or are they like, hey, this is my nonprofit, these are my donors, I want to be weary, there's only so many donors in the world? What have you seen out there?
Yeah, well, certainly there's perhaps discomfort about showing donors, and that's appropriate. We want to honor the privacy with those donors and really honor their intents. But I do find that there's really a great generosity of sharing broader trend data. Here's how our organization is going. Not always. There's certainly cases like perhaps we want to hide something that's not going so well. You see that now and then. But for the most part, we see very welcome sharing. Like with the Giving USA data, we're pulling it right from the IRS, so we have a little bit of it's less of an issue, I guess, from the IRS data. But a lot of this data is very public at the high level. You can look at a 990 and see how a nonprofit is doing. So the broader level data, I think there's openness, but I think it's fair. I mean, donors, for many of them, it's a very personal thing. Sometimes wealthy donors are kind of hit on all sides being asked for money. And so it's not just that they're protecting their donors, although that is definitely the case quite often. They're also protecting those donors and their own time as well.
Yeah, and I saw a trend recently that, the total giving continues to grow, but the amount of people giving is going down.
Yeah.
Why do you think that's happening, and what's kind of causing that?
Yeah, this is probably the biggest challenge in philanthropy today, is that fewer people give. And this isn't a per capita. There are fewer donors in the United States this year than last year, and this has been going on for 2 decades, really. We saw that in the Great Recession, kind of a big shift then in 08 and 09, which shows us that there has been economic shocks that have contributed to it. Like a quick example, in 08 and 09, giving did drop down, but it climbed up at a rate of about 11% a year. At the same time, the higher education sector grew by 42%. And we're like, wow, why are they doing so much better? Because then we saw other sectors like international affairs and environment flat to declining those 3 years. And we dug into it, and what we found is higher education was more aligned to the high net worth. The environment and international affairs, for example, were the most connected to the middle class. We saw the wealthy people in the United States growing by about 42% during those 3 years in their own income and assets, whereas the middle class was flat to declining over those years. It had less to do with how well the nonprofits were doing and more to do with their audiences. So over that time, we've seen economics have been tougher on the middle class. If you're trying to decide between milk, eggs, gas in your car, or if I'm going to give to charity, that's a tough choice. You're going to choose your essential needs first. And so I think that economics over time has shifted also nonprofits. Like, well, we're only getting traction from our high net worth. Let's configure our nonprofit more and more again towards wealthy people. So now that becomes our focus, and our messaging does not encourage the middle class donors. So it's almost like it's a snowballing effect. The economics weren't there, then we've shifted those strategies. And for example, some of our messaging, a high net worth donor is often seeking for big impact. I want to give a big gift to see a big problem being solved. If I'm giving $50, I probably don't believe that's going to majorly solve a huge problem. And what I'm going to respond to more is like, giving is good. It feels good to give. It's a cultural value, or people like us do things like this, where I might see value in my community. But if the focus and the messaging is around big impact and big gifts, I might be lost in that conversation.
One of the services that we provide is we help entrepreneurial families set up family foundations and create a legacy. And we design this, what we call legacy by design. And it's really just kind of setting up their family for that 100-year vision and how they can kind of utilize their money now to make impact in the community. How do you see family foundations kind of playing a role in some of these trends and kind of helping out either some of the larger nonprofits that you've seen, or even some of the smaller ones?
Yeah, it's a wonderful question, because it's one of the biggest trends is in structuring of philanthropy. This is really kind of the key area of family foundations. You might also include donor advised funds and other smaller scale structuring, but certainly the family foundation. What we saw is in the growth of giving in the United States, it's over $500 billion, $557 billion last year. There was 4 segments that grew by more than double digits, 10% growth last year. And the top among those was giving to foundations, actually setting up those foundations. More people gave into foundations than gave to higher education, than gave to the arts, that even gave to all the donor advised funds. So there's something to be, well, the national donor advised fund sponsoring groups like your Fidelity Schwab, but setting up those family foundations. And what we found is it sort of tracks just these broader giving trends. As more and more giving is coming from the high net worth, those are the same audiences that are more likely to really be planful, to be thinking about their charity. Like you mentioned, long-term, what's our family legacy? How can we involve people in philanthropy. And it's a very wonderful way to do that is through setting up those structured models. But at the same time, many nonprofits don't know how to work with family foundations. They don't know how to work with family offices to have those conversations. And those that do are the very top nonprofits, often very large institutions, are really quite comfortable in those conversations. So in addition to some of the everyday donors declining and the high net worth giving more of giving, we're starting to see some haves and have nots in the charitable sector because they're more equipped, and they've researched and they've studied about family foundations and family offices and other ways of structured assets. I think there's some shift that all nonprofits should learn how to talk about different ways people can give other than just writing a check from the checkbook.
I love that. And I want to double click on that here in a minute, but I have one
Yeah.
last question on family foundations. And, do you see, not just with setting up a family foundation to, maybe provide impact, but have you seen a trend in like their purpose of a family to create a foundation to really kind of help their kids become better human beings and give away some of the money and maybe, try to not raise entitled kids. I was talking with an entrepreneur a few days ago where, he's like, I don't want to I'll give my kids some money, but I want to give my money to a nonprofit, one that I own, so that one, it can protect his wealth for generations, but he can basically create a plan for his family to constantly be giving away the money over generations instead of
Yeah.
I really want to know, what is the trend of a kid blowing the money once the parents kind of give it to him, right? And how do they structure that family foundation so that it'll last for multi generations?
Yeah, I was just having a conversation with Jason Briggs, who leads Pyro Solutions. It's a think tank out of the UK, does a lot of research on how major gift wealth is given. And he had pointed out from data he pulled from the Federal Reserve in the US and from other sources that over 90% of major gift wealth given in the United States is entrepreneurial business wealth. These are first generation, where it was like 3 to 4% was from inherited wealth. We think about these large inheritances, but it's oftentimes the founders, the entrepreneurs, are the most philanthropic. So this is not a new trend. How do I have my kids or the next generation or the future replicate that philanthropic nature? And it's a broader question even than the family foundations, but I do want to focus in on that a little bit, is that modeled philanthropy is something that seems to be declining. And what I mean by that is the most specifically, and this is not a sacred or religious versus secular, but religiously affiliated donors historically have given almost 4 times more to secular causes than non-religiously affiliated people. And one might say it's a faith tradition, but many have researched that it's actually that these kids sat and saw their parents give to the proverbial offering plate every week growing up. So they saw philanthropy modeled 50 times a year. Kids not seeing giving happen, and how are they going to replicate that? So you've seen places like St. Jude color the chili pepper at the Chili's restaurant, or you buy a cartoon character and paste it over the register. It's not about the dollar. It's about the kid in the shopping cart seeing their parent give philanthropically. Now we take that to the high net worth. They have those same human concerns that I want my kids to see that giving is important to me. It's important to me as a value. And as I'm setting up this family foundation, or even setting up my kids as beneficiaries on my donor advised fund, is another way you sometimes see this same behavior. That's a real human thing, that what it's important to me as an entrepreneur is not just my success in business, but what that means for society in general. And the significance is not just having a great life, but helping others have a great life. I think that's something that almost every, at least philanthropic wealthy person, I've met a lot of wonderful people, that's something they almost all care about, is for their kids. So I think you hit the nail on the head on this one. It's really very much about that next generation.
Yeah, I agree too. And I always think that, for your kids, it's what is caught, not taught, right? So when they see the parents giving and supporting or volunteering, they're just going to grow up and just think that is what it is, right? A lot of people, whether it's kids or adults, they don't know what they don't know. So they have to be shown, hey,
Yeah.
this is how you should do this. Like every business owner didn't build a successful business without learning or talking to somebody else that has maybe gotten to that point there. And I want to tell a quick story.
Yeah.
So I have a family foundation. My kids are young. They're 9, 12, and 13. And the other day in the car, my wife and I are driving home with the family, and my daughter is, part of their giving plan is they have to go volunteer when they find a nonprofit that they want to support, because we give each of them money to give out that they choose. And my daughter's like at 13 is like, oh, I'm going to go and volunteer at this organization. And my son in the back seat's like, oh, I want to go too. And it's like, you want to go with your sister to go volunteer? Like, where did this come
Awesome.
from? Like, and so it's just one of those things where at 12 years old, just because I'm taking my daughter to go volunteer at this nonprofit that we're going to in 2 weeks, my son's like, well, I want to go with you guys. Like, my wife was going with my youngest to softball, and I'm taking my daughter to volunteer. And now my son wants to go instead of going to softball. So it's like, they're starting to see at a young age, like, hey, let's volunteer. Let's figure out, how can we help other people? And because we started at a young age, they got to feel that that gratification of helping other people. Kind of, when they give their first check to a founder, and the founder isn't expecting it, and it's coming from my daughter or my son, and the founder starts crying, and they pull them in for a big bear hug, and then my kids start crying. It's like, that's when you hook them. And so that's why it's like, now it's like, oh, I want to go help here. Like, well, we're not doing anything on a Saturday. Let's go help over here. And it's just a great tool or vehicle that basically almost forces us to be more philanthropic and giving than if we didn't have it at all. So it's amazing just, being able to do that.
Yeah, I love that. And perhaps it's easier for us to see it at the family level, like to talk with our kids. This is why we do this. But sometimes I wonder if even in a broader community level, our culture, we're so private about money. Like, when I was growing up, my dad never told me about the bills. Like, I had to figure that out on my own when I moved out. He was religious, so I did see him giving. So that from that modeled philanthropy example, but I don't know if culturally we talk about giving outside of being asked for gifts by nonprofits as much, and talk about money and how that's uplifting and that volunteering. Because just by modeling that behavior for your kids, they pick that up. And there's sort of this cultural, like, I want to fit into a group that we all have. And this is what fitting into this group means. And I think within a family, and our family, this is what we do. We go help out at the shelter, at the serving food or packing lunches or whatever it might be. And what we know is, like, from some of the research out of University of Maryland and their Do Good Institute, that pro-social behavior begets pro-social behavior. People that, say, serve on a jury are more likely to vote. People that vote are more likely to volunteer. People that volunteer are more likely to give. That there's almost a contagious nature of benevolence, that even if starting something small like helping out can be a huge part of a pathway towards philanthropy and doing great for society.
Yeah, I love that. So let's get back into our questions here, right? So that was
Sure.
great. I love that little break off there. What advice would you give a smaller nonprofit that's trying to attract donors, in the current landscape? And I know we just had an election. Do you anticipate it being better or worse for nonprofits? Like, how does that kind of every 4 years, right? We're going to go through an election. Does that have a big impact, or are people still going to be supporting, nonprofits no matter what?
Yeah, I think on both fronts. I mean, the overall advice in the current climate is you can't change the economy. And in some ways, you can't change the perception of the economy. As some would argue, the economy is much better than people believe. But we're coming off of cumulative inflation, and the middle class is crunched. So there's no question about that. But we do know that there's great value in being in a community. First of all, if I'm giving to an animal shelter, I'm saying something about what I value, and I'm likely to enjoy knowing other people that give to the animal shelter. Many nonprofits focus on cultivating this donor to give to their mission and forget about introducing them to each other. Because when these donors become friends, we've seen as much as 4 to 5 times increase in lifetime giving with no fancy science, but just our donors became friends with each other. It was a reinforcement cultivation, and every nonprofit can build community among their donors. So I'm not just giving to you, I'm joining a group of people that are choosing to give to you. It's a subtle difference, but an important one. And I think part of that is they want to be invited into your mission. These high net worth donors, they're invited in. Bill Gates probably feels he's curing malaria or he's solving these problems, even though financially it's money so that other researchers and lots of other ecosystems can do that. But he feels part of it. And it's easy for us to think of a high net worth donor feeling part of a mission. But how can we help the everyday donor feel part of our mission? That's something we can all be doing. And part of that same authenticity, I would say, is in that digital economy, which I don't mean to be cliched, but podcasts, YouTube, Reels, TikTok, if it's going to be around, who knows on that front. These are accessible ways to build authentic communications that we can all do. So I think for smaller nonprofits, I would leverage these tools. Content takes time, but you've got a story to tell. Get out there and tell the story. When it comes to the election, it's a little bit trickier because there's always pros and cons on each side. Anytime someone gets elected, we see a little bump in giving to nonprofits that represent the contrary opinion. Some people would say it's like a reactionary giving, and that happens regardless of which party succeeds. I think in the current climate, there's a little bit of optimism in some of the business sector, especially around taxes. The Tax Cuts and Job Act, which went into effect back in 2017, did have some adverse impact on the mid-level giving, so the $5, $10, $15, $25,000 level gifts, and which were right below that itemizer line, and that's kind of where we saw that adverse effects. But a lot of economists thought actually it probably lifted up overall giving outside of those segments. So it's hard to say one tax policy is going to be good or bad, because some people will make more money and maybe will give that. Other areas might decline in giving. What we do know is that when people are more engaged in elections, they tend to be more engaged in giving to nonprofits. So there's a high level of engagement in this election. Maybe that will be something that's really positive. I would, what we also saw was during the pandemic, people gave much more locally towards parks and communities that I can use while I'm quarantined or whatnot. And then once we moved, and then it started to move international again when we started to see international conflict. Like Ukraine was an area we started to see international giving again. So what happens in the geopolitical space, both inside our borders and outside, can affect where money flow goes. If we see pain around the world, people do respond. If we see pain in our backyard, people want to solve those problems. But also, it's easy to think about that from essential needs, like hard things like food, clothing, shelter. When times are tough, people do step up to solve those. When people feel that times are good, they tend to give more towards self-actualization, future, innovation, big ideas. And so depending on that direction, that's something I'd pay attention to. If the economy is feeling more crunched, we might see more growth in human services like we have the last couple of years. If we see more economic thriving, I suppose, we might see bigger education research type gifts and some other types of future thinking ideation type of gifts. So I don't have a crystal ball, but I do know they have some impact, but it's not all good. It's not all bad. It's just that the flow seems to shift around.
Yeah. And I saw this alarming stat, and tell me if I'm wrong with this stat, but it's the trust in nonprofits is at 52%. And that's like barely above the trust in government and media. Why is that true? And why do you think the trust is declining? And how can nonprofits kind of regain that trust?
Yeah. I mean, there's some mystery around this number. Like, it's true. I think this comes out of Edelman's research on the trust in nonprofits. And it's, big business has been, people trust that more than the nonprofit. And to be fair, it's being pulled down by the non-donors. Obviously, if you're giving, you have a higher level of trust, but there's fewer and fewer donors, as we established before. And there's some issues there. And I've got a few theories. I mean, one of them I think is a lot of nonprofits are maybe more focused on the problems than the solutions. And what I mean by that is it's sort of a reminder of the negative. Oh yeah, this nonprofit represents this negative thing. And we hear why, pick your thing, why malaria is bad, or why this type of disease that we're researching is bad, why the unhoused, that's a bad situation, as opposed to leading with positive solutions and solving. So in some ways, maybe just psychologically we're reminded, maybe it's guilt, like there's a lot of bad things, I can't help everything. And so there's some negativity there. I don't know if that's the case. I do think that perhaps we've seen the trust better locally than we've seen nationally. So I don't trust nonprofits, but I trust the ones I know. So perhaps that's a brand issue in nonprofits. And I think maybe it relates a little bit to this high net worth audience too, where I want to celebrate high net worth philanthropy. It's really solving a lot of world problems. But maybe the nonprofits that have become so focused on the high net worth, I'm starting to categorize charity as something the wealthy people do. Um, like it's not lost on me that we've seen a rise during the same time period in GoFundMe or giving in different ways outside of giving to registered charities, because I think there's an authenticity and impact that they're able to offer. When I volunteer or when your kid's going with you volunteering, they see the smiles on the faces of the other person that they're working with. When I give to a GoFundMe, I know who I'm helping and I can see that being helped. When I send $100 to charity, I've got hope at the best because so few really can give me that same authentic feeling, right?
Yeah.
So how can the nonprofits embrace some of that authenticity that we're seeing in other non-formal charitable mechanisms that we see all around us?
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing is when we have our kids give from our family foundation, we make them hand a physical check out.
Awesome.
We don't do online donations because the purpose of the family foundation is to get them engaged and get them to get that feeling when they hand out that endorphin rush, once they feel the thankfulness and the joy that kind of comes back to them. And so, all of the families that we work with, when we're setting these up for them, it's like, that's one of the prerequisites. Like you're going to have to give away physical checks, don't have your kids do online donations if you can give a physical check, because that's where they're going to feel it for that long-term effect of why you're doing what you're doing. So that's great.
I love that. I just wanted to say, first of all, how awesome that is. I tried to have my kids participate by doing a gift catalog, and it was fun to click on the goat and 2 chickens for a villager or that type of thing. But to actually see someone's face, have that human contact while you're giving, thanks for doing that. I think that's just wonderful.
Yeah, it's been a game changer. I mean, just to see where my kids started from before to afterwards, like, I'm an entrepreneur. I have an office, and in the summer, I can't get them to come into the office to, make some extra money by shredding paper or bringing me coffee or filing paperwork. But I can get them to give away money, and to the point where there's like, yeah, let's go volunteer. I'll get off my PlayStation and I'll go volunteer, and we're going to go do some fun stuff. And who can we now give away money to this quarter? So yeah, it's definitely a different vehicle. But again, if we didn't have this in place, they would still be doing, on their devices on the weekends, and they wouldn't be thinking about supporting other people, or even just an activity of getting out of the house. And that activity is now productive and helping other people. So it's definitely been a game changer. And my wife will tell you the exact same thing. It's she's the CEO of our family foundation, and she just loves kind of what we're able to do and kind of the kids that we're raising now. So it's definitely a game changer.
I love that. I mean, what you're seeing, like with your family, is that real joy of giving. And I think so many people talk about giving as like a burden, like, oh, they're asking me for money again and so forth. And maybe it is a burden for many. Like in a lot of nonprofits, it's all about the ask. But what I'm here, like, there's fundraising between the asks. How do we, first of all, where they can be different, but from the perspective of someone who does give, there is real joy in that. And there's something really noble about the profession of fundraising that's not often talked about, is we're actually helping people do for them things that give them joy. For many, that is one of the coolest things they've ever done. They're proud of. I know families that like would put it next to their wedding and their kids as a large gift they gave to a charity, like at that level. But when we have a wedding, all your friends and family are there. It's fun. You're all celebrating. When you have kids, you have baby showers or Facebook posts, all these things. But when you're giving, sometimes it can be kind of lonely. So bringing your family in to celebrate giving together so they can all get the joy of that, I think that's a really huge thing. I'd love to see more of that. Thanks for doing that.
Yeah. And I think one of the big things that worried my wife is, my youngest is now 9, and she's not the snuggly, girl anymore. She doesn't need my wife to kind of, like, she's more independent now, or getting that way. Yeah. And my wife's like, well, what do I do now? Like, I don't know what to do. I need some new purpose. And I think she also saw it as like, hey, they're getting older, and they're getting older really quick. how can we create a vehicle that almost forces them that no matter if they're in their 20s, 30s, or 40s, they're still, it's a purpose driven. We're bringing them together for family retreats, and we're bringing them together for quarterly, dinners to talk about, giving and who we're going to support. And I think she loves the fact that we can utilize it in the future as a purpose of getting the family back together multiple times a year
Yeah.
outside of just the normal holidays. Right. And
Yep.
so she saw it as like, hey, let's get this instilled in them young so that it's just a no brainer that as they get older, it's just something that we do every quarter. So we plan our year, at the beginning of the year, our entire year, all of our events, all of our dinners, even some of my speaking gigs, all of that gets planned
Mm.
at the beginning of the year. And even our family retreat and our quarterly dinners, right? Where the purpose is, hey, on this date, we're going out to dinner and we're going to talk about this and how much we're going to have to give away, or not have to, but how much we get to give away.
Yeah.
And, at that point, they know that by that dinner, they need to know, up to 4 nonprofits that we want to support to get on a short list. And then we kind of talk about them, right? And so, it's all pre-planned at the beginning of the year, and that's just something that we're doing every single year. So even when our kids are in their 30s and 40s, it's just something that it's just already planned for the year. It's already in your calendar, and there's
Yeah.
no excuses to not show up and get together. So
Oh,
my wife really loved the ability to be able to do something like that, and she's just scared that they're growing so fast that one day they're just going to be gone and they're not going to come back.
oh, it's the
And
fear. I've
this is
got
the way.
college age kids. I'm right there with you. Like, and that's hard to deal with. But in addition to just like sharing those behaviors and having an opportunity to connect as family, I also like that they're bringing, say, 4 charities that they want to support. Because to narrow that down means you're probably looking at way more than 4 to get an idea of the landscape, what's out there, and also to evaluate what's important to me, what do I value. That's important thinking for all of us to have, especially those of us in the blur of life. We're going to work. Maybe we get the letter, maybe we get a email request for charity, but maybe just sitting back sometime outside of who's asking and say, what does matter to me? What is important to me? To start that thinking process, because it's very tough with such a broad variety of nonprofits to give to. Like, you want to help everybody. That's one of the challenges of giving. Like, thousands and thousands of places, probably millions of places are worthy. But if I'm going to make an impact, how am I going to make that choice? I think that's also a really valuable skill set.
Yeah, well, here in Illinois, there's like 87,000 nonprofits, right? And so, we understand and we let our kids choose. And we understand that, hey, what you like now, probably, you'll want to support something different in 5 or 10 years. So, it's a great way of them to really experience all of these different types of organizations, as they get older.
Mm-hmm.
And, once they start having kids and they start bringing their kids into the mix, that's going to be exciting because then it
Oh, yeah.
almost starts all over again, right? So, like, my daughter now is into, travel sports, and she wants to help, buy equipment and things like that for underprivileged kids so that they can play the sport too. And so she's focusing on that right now. My
Awesome.
son loves, firefighter, organizations and things like that. So, and then my youngest daughter, she wants to give to every homeless man on the street. And
Oh, yeah.
so it's just one of
Good
those
for
things
her.
that it'll be cool to see how it evolves over time,
Mm.
and kind of how they change based on their current level. And, when my daughter's about to go into high school, so it's going to be a whole new level of, she'll be exposed to different types of organizations and nonprofits
Yeah.
that she hasn't been to yet. So it'll be cool to see how it changes.
Awesome. Awesome. Love it.
Yeah. Well, Josh, this has been an awesome conversation. Thank you so much for being here today. I know our audience, we talked a lot about family foundations and trends, but, it was a great conversation for just even people listening that, they're in, they're business owners or they're entrepreneurs, and even
Mhm.
kind of getting them into family foundations. I'm hoping that this talk maybe kind of planted that seed, and then using that family foundation to also, help other, smaller nonprofits in their community, and kind of alleviate some of these trends that you're seeing, and hopefully will provide some growth. Once again, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you, Tom. The pleasure is mine. I really appreciate you doing this for the sector and for the world of philanthropy. Really cool. Great conversation.
Yeah, we'll definitely have you back because I have questions that can go on for hours. So we're going to do another episode here shortly, and we're going to get some more information out of you. So, Josh, thank you so much for being on the Million Dollar Nonprofit Podcast today. We'll see you soon. Thank you for tuning in to the Million Dollar Nonprofit Podcast. If you'd like free resources to take your nonprofit to the $1 million mark, visit realtomkelly.com/playbooks. And because I'm committed to helping nonprofits maximize their impact and reach as many people as possible, contact us at hello@realtomkelly.com to explore bringing me in to speak at your next event. And as always, I'm looking forward to sharing more transformative insights with you on our next episode.